Muhammad would be in the top three.
Here we have a man who began a mission. He gave light to the world.
He was not just a spiritual genius, but he also had political gifts of a very high order.
Outside of the Islamic world, almost nothing is known about Muhammad, whereas for Muslims, he is the ultimate role model and his life is known in every detail. The Armenian historian Sibius wrote about Muhammad just 24 years after his death.
The particular interest here is that for the first time in Armenian, someone talks about Muhammad and mentions him by name and says a little bit about what he did. Translating from the Armenian. At that time, a certain man whose name was Mahmed, which is the usual name for Muhammad in Armenian, a merchant, as if by the command of God, appeared to them as a preacher. Now, Muhammad gave them laws, namely, not to eat carrion, not to drink wine, not to speak falsehood, and not to engage in fornication.
With both his parents now dead, Muhammad was all alone in the world, an orphan at the tender age of 6. These searing events would have a profound impact on his outlook and his personality. According to Muslim tradition, by the time he was 21, Muhammad had gained a reputation for integrity and was known as Al-Amin and Al-Sadiq, the honest and truthful one.
His marriage to Sitna Khadija was most unusual. She was most unusual to start off with, being, a little bit older than him and also being so successful in her own right as a businesswoman. But I think it could actually be quite unusual even by today's times. I mean, many men, Western men, Muslim, non-Muslim, are intimidated by successful women. So I think it shows great strength of character, confidence and respect for women in the Prophet himself, that he entered into this marriage back then, and that anyone who would do so now would have to have those qualities as well.
In the case of Khadija, she is proof that women are an equal partner in creating a Muslim society.
He was really upset by the bad treatment of the poor and the weak and the downtrodden people in society. There's definitely this great ontological anxiety he had about, the big questions. Why are we here? What's the purpose of life? How do we make sense of the world around us?
The most direct, the most unequivocal statement in the Quran is, there is no compulsion in religion, no ifs, ands, or buts. That is the essence. Unless you make a free choice, a free, willing choice for faith, you cannot be held accountable for your actions thereafter. That's the essence of what Islam is about.
At first, when Muhammad began his mission to the people of Mecca, he kept referring back to the Abrahamic message of the Christian and Jewish prophets, that he was only preaching what they had preached, the message of the one true God.
But the prophet at heart is a warner, because he's a reformer. The reformer is warning the society and saying, this is a society that has departed from the straight path.
A mosque is not just a place of worship. A mosque is a focal point of community. It is a place where the transformative mission of Islam must be put into practice by services for the needy, services for the community, services to help people to achieve the objectives of Islam. It's a center for education. That's what a mosque should be. It's not what an awful lot of mosques are today. And the other thing is that mosques have to be welcoming, open places, not just for Muslims, because the transformative mission, the social objectives of Islam don't belong just to Muslims, They are for everybody.
But Muhammad was now not only the prophet of a new religion, he was also effectively the political leader of the community here in Medina. And he fused these two roles right here in the courtyard of his mosque where he spent most of his days. Now, as his role grew, Muhammad decided that what he really needed was an agreement that would not only formalize his role in Medina, but also his relationship with the various tribes. It became known as the Constitution of Medina and is thought to be one of the earliest written constitutions anywhere in the world.
This constitution, all the tribes of Medina, they sign it together.
Including the Jews, including the pagans?
Include everyone. They sign it to call what they call it Ummah. The
community?
Yeah, everyone is responsible for the protection of Medina and they are equal against the law. They run a complete state with all its law. For example, if any two Jews fight each other, they will come to the Prophet and he will judge them not according to Islamic law, to the Jews' law. There is a complete court, everything is there as a state. Right. So he built what you call it a complete civilized state in Arabia.
The interesting thing about the Constitution of Medina is that it recognized that all these people, pagan Arabs, as well as the Muslims, the Ansar and the Muhajirin, and the Christians in that city, were part of the same ummah, of the same nation. Nowadays, of course, Muslims often use the term ummah to mean the Muslim community. But that is not how it was used in that very first constitution of an Islamic state. So when people today say to me, we would like to create an Islamic state here or there, I say to them, will it be like the first one in Medina or not? And if not, why not?
To me, the most important part of the example of the Prophet and the message of the Quran is the acceptance of plurality. The need for and the realization that there are many faiths, many ways, and all are capable of being a community, an ummah together.
The Prophet prayed, he meditated, he contemplated, but he also said, pray, but tie your camel. That means praying itself is not good enough. You have to do good. You have to create a healthy, better society at the same time. Anybody who follows a spiritual tradition and does good, and the emphasis on doing good is very, very important, is in fact following on the way of Muhammad.
By 627 AD, Muhammad had become a powerful ruler in Medina. But by all accounts, in his personal habits and way of life, he remained modest. He continued to live next to his small mosque that served both as a place of worship and as a center for his work. Everyone was free to enter and speak with him. Jews, Christians, non-believers, even slaves.
If you read the accounts, it is clear that he's a very charismatic figure. He's a person that numerous people came for advice, constantly came for advice. But it was not just that he was dispensing sage advice. He was always listening to people. He comes out as a very humane and warm person.
I think Muhammad does come across in many different contexts as being quite gentle, quite reluctant to find fault. He seems a very fair individual.
Muslim sources talk of his simple taste in clothes and his dislike of gold or silk or other luxuries. He did not care for possessions and gave much away in charity or as gifts.
I haven't personally detected any sign that Muhammad was guided by power. I think his integrity remained intact. He was scrupulous over any corruption or financial issues. I think he stood out as a kind of exemplary human being who could combine that moral vision with the requirements of being a leader of a growing organization.
Muhammad received revelations throughout his life, but between Mecca and Medina, their content changed significantly. Whereas in Mecca, the revelations dealt with inward principles of spirituality and faith, Here in Medina, the revelations would be far more practical. They provided a blueprint for how one should live life on a day-to-day basis as a Muslim, from the social to the political. A blueprint that many Muslims try to follow today.
Whilst in Mecca, he is very much a religious preacher. He talks much more about issues such as the end of time, you know, it's about morality, about justice and these kind of things. But once he moves to Medina, he is the functioning leader of a community. He therefore has to get much more involved in the day-to-day running of a community. How people interact with each other, how people manage inheritance, how people greet each other even.
The revelations could be quite explicit. All Muslims should pay a tax to support the sick and needy, or they could be general guidelines about how to treat others to promote justice and human dignity. Muhammad used these principles in deciding matters brought to him as the ruler of Medina. Over time, a moral code was revealed to Muhammad based on ideas of social justice for all. In the Quran, it was called Sharia, or the way to know God.
We have 3 verses where the concept is revealed in one way or in another, in one form or in another. And in fact, what was understood by the Prophet and his companions is that what they were trying to implement was in fact this way towards God. So this is why we have a problem of defining the word, because the scholars afterward define Sharia as God's law. But because they were jurists, so for them Sharia is all about law. But what he was doing is just promoting, you know, brotherhood, justice, equality, freedom. This is Sharia.
But most scholars now agree that the term jihad does not mean holy war. Its real meaning is completely different.
The concept of jihad emerges out of the Holy Quran, out of the revelation that the Prophet receives. And there are about 35 examples in the Quran of the word jihad, or the term basically being used, and often in the case of striving. Now, striving can be all sorts of things. It can be striving against the baseness of one's self. It can be seeking to overcome evil and being good. It can be striving in the sense of fighting. But jihad is always distinguished from fighting, and a different terminology is used for the word fighting.
In all the battles that Muhammad fought, the rules of engagements were always carefully delineated within the context of his time and what was generally acceptable. But there are no recorded instances of deliberate attacks on civilian populations.
One of the points about jihad in the early Islamic tradition, both in the Prophet's lifetime and afterwards, is that it's a gradual evolution of an idea towards something like a just war. And the just war is a constraint on the army, does not attack or massacre civilians, doesn't kill women, children, doesn't kill priests of other religions, incidentally, and so on. And this draws on the practice in the lifetime of the Prophet.
There is the concept of just war in Islam, and Muhammad himself fought many battles. But for him, there was no justification of the killing of innocent people. In January 630, the Prophet gathered a massive army of 10,000 men and marched towards Mecca. The Quraysh were powerless to resist, and they fully expected Muhammad to storm into Mecca and exact a bloody revenge for the many years of persecution and war. Their control of the city was at an end. But it was what he did next, at this his hour of ultimate victory, that left people stunned. Muhammad declared that he forgave all his former enemies. He then said that there was to be a general amnesty, and he said that no one was to be forced to convert to Islam. Instead of revenge, Muhammad consciously chose reconciliation. For Muhammad, this was the moment he had been waiting for. He had come back to Mecca not to kill the Quraysh, but to restore the Kaaba to its role as the sacred shrine to the one God.
Seems to me that that's the heart and essence of the life of the Prophet, the moment it was building to. From what I understand and know of the personality of the Prophet, it is the most characteristic moment in his entire life. He was not a vengeful man. His message was not about vengeance, but about constructing a transformative, reformative process, building society by including everybody. So it seems to me that when he came back to Mecca, that's when I say, yes, that's the point from which we begin. That's the model we need to build on.
Muhammad's bloodless conquest of Mecca was clear proof that his movement was succeeding. And what's more, his message of justice and using peace and reconciliation as a means of delivering that message was beginning to attract huge numbers of converts.
Muhammad expressed and exemplified the qualities that we now see universally are characteristic of a good leader and a leader for good. Enthusiasm, integrity, then the combination of toughness and demandingness and fairness is very important in leaders universally, and Muhammad had all those attributes very clearly. I think warmth, humanity, kindness is important too. And again, if you look at the traditions of the life of Muhammad, there are plenty of examples where he showed those kind of humane qualities.
You see in the final sermon this heartfelt plea from the Prophet, warning the Muslims about certain things, advising them about certain things. You can see his worries for the future of the Muslims, and that these words are something that they should take note of and they should hang on to and they should be aware, because in here is a very, very important message for every Muslim.
Do not therefore do injustice to yourselves. Remember, one day you will meet Allah and answer your deeds. So beware, do not astray from the path of righteousness after I am gone.
Remember what God's earliest message was to Abraham, to Adam, to Moses, to Jesus, etc. And remember that the only real reality, the ultimate reality, is the one true God. And that God is the creator, sustainer, and judge of the universe.
All mankind is from Adam and Eve. An Arab has no superiority over a non-Arab, nor a non-Arab has any superiority over an Arab. Also, a white has no superiority over black, nor a black has any superiority over white, except by piety and good action.
He's saying all humans are one. God has called you from the tribalism of paganism and its pride in ancestors. But remember, all men come from Adam, and Adam came from dust. And then he quotes these words from the Quran, which really speak to our time. "O people," God says to humanity, "we have formed you from a male and a female, and have formed you into tribes and nations, so that you may get to know one another. Not so that you may fight or oppress or occupy or convert or terrorize, but so that you may get to know one another."
All those who listen to me shall pass on my words to others, and those to others again. And may the last ones understand my words better than those who listen to me directly. Be my witness, O Allah, that I have conveyed your message to your people.
And he asks them, "O people, O Muslims, have I fulfilled my mandate to you?" And they cry, "Nam." Yes, and it rings around. And he asks them 3 times, "Have I?" And each time they reply, "Nam." And I think it's a most moving moment.
Well, that's his summation of his life. So he emphasizes all the principles that he's been teaching for the last 23 years. He says, for example, there's no difference between Arab and non-Arab. Look after your family. So it's kind of summation of his life. If you did nothing else, but simply read the last sermon, you will get the essence of the life of Muhammad.
The Prophet's final sermon sets the agenda for modern, contemporary Muslim society. It shows where we've failed, and it shows where we have to try to get to. It sums up the transformative mission.
But if we examine his life in total, we find that he left Arabia a better place than he found it. When faced with persecution, he chose to suffer rather than to retaliate. Although he fought many military battles, he turned his back on war when he could. His ultimate victory came through peace, not through conflict. And with that victory, he chose the path of reconciliation rather than revenge. And finally, in his farewell sermon, Muhammad left us with the most important lesson of all, that we are all equal, Arab and non-Arab, Muslim and non-Muslim, a universal message that is as relevant today as it was in 7th century Arabia. And it seems to me that this is the true legacy of the life of Muhammad.